ask you about a mystery I've been trying to figure out and share it with you, see if you have any ideas about it. The National Opinion Research Center in Chicago does longitudinal studies of public opinion. They ask the same questions every year over a long period of time, which to my mind are among the most reliable opinion findings we have, because it's the same thing, right, for a random sample every year. And in 1976, they found 27% of Americans had a great deal of confidence in the American press. And maybe 55, 60 had some confidence in the American press. 30 years later, 4.5% of Americans have a great deal of confidence in the American press. Okay? So from 1976 to 2006, we go from 27% with a great deal of confidence, meaning I totally trust this institution, to 4.5%. Now, in the same interval, American journalists are becoming more well-educated. They're rising in social status. And most observers in my business would say they're becoming more professional. That is, the observance of professional standards is going up. So here's the mystery. How is it possible that journalists become more educated, more professional, and the observance of professional standards goes up and confidence goes down? Now, I ask this question to journalists. They always give me the same answer.
Fox?
No. Well, they say that. Yeah, they definitely say, well, it's because all of the opinion shouters, it's the cable shout fest, right? That's their second most common answer. The first most common answer is, well, confidence in all big institutions has gone down, Jay, which doesn't really make sense.
That's interesting.
Because if you're the watchdogs and other institutions are fucking up, confidence you should go up, right? Okay. When Richard Nixon screwed up, confidence in the press should have gone up, right? Because they're the watchdogs. So what would explain this from your point of view?
Well, so the one thing I'd want to know is, was that a linear decline, or was there any period in which there was either a step function, or was it a logistic curve?
There is no blip up. However, there's an accelerating decline, let's say after '88.
Okay, so here is a hypothesis, which is, media critics were wringing their hands till their thumbs turned blue for 40 years about media contraction, right? It's contracting.
Consolidation.
Consolidation is terrible, terrible, terrible. If you looked out the window and tried to find any contraction, right? We'd gone from 3 broadcast channels and no cable channels to 7 broadcast channels, 700 kids, right? It was an obsession with the media critics, and it caused them to take leave of their senses, because for any actual citizen, the story of media was a story of just increased abundance. And I think that faith in the press came with very little ability for any one institution to look in on any other institution. There was very little overlap of reporting. You tended to get news from, Walter Cronkite and your local paper or what have you. And with few sources, there was very little variability of the story.
So nobody was contradicting each other.
Nobody was contradicting each other. And I think that So this is I think one of the great, again, the sort of life was perfect up until about 5 years ago narrative that's often put out, which is newspapers regarded as being obviously the case that the period of high confidence in newspapers was the correct view, and that low confidence in newspapers is an incorrect view. When in fact,
depraved,
and when in fact it's not at all clear what the right level of public confidence in the media is. But I think that there is almost no one for whom the fallibility of news organizations is, rather the infallibility of news organizations is any longer a background assumption. And I think that loss of the new journalist version of papal infallibility is probably the erosive, the thing that's eroded.
Yeah. Well, here's a way to think about it, Clay. In the age of mass media, when everybody was connected up to big media but not to each other, people actually had doubts about the portrait of the world that they were given.
That's right.
But they weren't able to find out that lots of other people had the same doubts. Now, with the internet being as good for connecting horizontally as it is vertically, those people find each other. Right. And suddenly you realize you're not crazy. Right. And that lots of other people are as dissatisfied as you are.
Or you can find enough other crazy people that, so one of the interesting findings is that no matter how far an opinion deviates from the norm, and this is more along psychological axes than political.
There's somebody else who shares it.
Right. And so, it is in a way an alarming sign.
And there's a blog about it.
Pedophiles now feel more normal on average because they talk to other people who feel just as they do, and so
But this is where Sunstein says it's an echo chamber.
No, that's right. But that reference group issue is, I think, across the board. Is not. I think that is a large scale social change we're dealing with, not just the news. The thing that haunts me about that observation is the unmasking of the Bush National Guard memos, the thing that cost Dan Rather his job.
2004.
In 2004. And it was, CBS was running with a hoax against a sitting president of the United States.
Right.
And
shameful levels of verification involved.
Unreal.
Really bad journalism.
It is from my point of view. I'm no fan of Bush. I voted against him twice and for Obama and all the rest of it, but it's a shame Rather didn't have two jobs to lose. That was unbelievable, and it was the blogosphere that did it. And it wasn't deep investigation. It was somebody saying, "Hey, they didn't have proportional fonts on typewriters in the 1970s." It was nothing. It was, if you came at that story with an ounce of skepticism, you could start looking. And it was clear that CBS went for the narrative and the scoop over the skepticism. And the thing that I wonder, and I think is part of the background story of this loss of confidence in the media, is thank God for Little Green Footballs, after which, who was the blog that first published this observation about fonts and typewriters, at which point the left-wing blogosphere went crazy trying to find IBM typewriters with proportional fonts, rather than saying, oh yeah, maybe.
I was blogging it at the time, I remember.
Unbelievable. Yeah. But what it really makes me think is, how many times did people get away with it?
Without being checked.
Yeah, prior to, I'm not sure that fact-checking has fallen inside traditional media outlets, but I am positive that after the fact-checking is way up. And after the fact-checking seems to have damaged the media's ability to say the story as we published it is largely correct, and if there are corrections, they are minor.
Right.
Because now, suddenly, the Heens blow apart. I don't know if it's pronounced Heen or Heene because I only read about it, but the Balloon Boy father, that story blew apart in real time, even as the footage is being run on TV. And you think, how many people got away with this prior to the rise and after the fact-checking?
Yeah, to pick up on that, I was following that very closely when, in 2004, when that story emerged. I blogged about it consistently through that period. And one of the striking things about it was, well, first of all, CBS, a communications company, after all, had nobody reading the internet. CBS had no idea what was happening to its story online, because anybody who was following this at the time realized that the story was falling apart. And if CBS had been reading the internet, they never would have let the face of the brand, Dan Rather, go out there and defend this story, because there were doubts about it 2 days after it ran that were serious enough to keep them from, okay, so that's number one. Second thing is that, and I think a lot of journalists still don't understand this, the internet is very efficient at forwarding information that contradicts your story. And if it exists anywhere in the distributed network, it will be found, and it will be forwarded and placed against what you just reported.
Right.
So if we go back 2 years before that to the Trent Lott case.
Yeah.
Right? Which John
Podhoretz.
Yeah. Which John Podhoretz called the Internet's first scalp. Right? In that case, what gets overlooked is that the ABC producer and the CBS reporters who were there when Trent Lott said, if Strom Thurmond had been
elected in 48, we wouldn't have had all these problems.
Right. Yeah. The chances of an individual journalist not knowing the relevant background to understand what an outrageous remark that were probably 50-50, right? If you didn't know the campaign of 1948, you wouldn't understand what was important about it. But what are the chances of the interconnected blogosphere not knowing that background?
Zero.
Zero.
Right. Well, the great story there, and something that I mean, it's something I put into Here Comes Everybody, is that there was a guy, Ed Sebesta, whose theory is that U.S. history in the 20th century is the history of a fight between, it's a crypto fight between the North and the South that is a continuation of the Civil War by other means, and that there is something that he calls the crypto confederacy. And so he had been tracking Trent Lott's statements to small racist publications since the middle of the 1980s.
Right, kind of an underground history.
Right, and there's no way, and it was Micah Marshall who got him, there's no way that Micah Marshall could have known about him or found him, but he didn't need to because Sebesta found his way to Micah Marshall.
Exactly, that's what I meant. Yeah, the interconnected blogosphere is going to find that information and forward it immediately.
So this is, I think, the thing that is so outrageous about the FTC hearings that recently went on around journalism and around the earlier, they've gone to the FTC because basically the Justice Department said, we're not going to suspend antitrust law on your behalf. So now they're going to the Trade Commission instead.
They being the newspaper.
Oh, sorry, they being the newspaper industries, because the golden age is ending and the nation will collapse without them. The story that I often reference is the 2002 priestly abuse scandal in Boston, which, I mean, the thing that just came out of Ireland, the report that just came out of Ireland, is connected in an unbroken line from the Boston Globe's original two-part investigation into that story. But the amazing thing is that in '92, the Globe also investigated another priest, Shanley, who'd also raped or fondled 100 boys in his tenure, had also been moved around, also in the Diocese of Boston, also by law, also by bishop law. So it was basically a do-over in 2002. In 2002, the thing that gave the story continuity to this recent Irish report and the continued troubles of the Vatican was that it wasn't that people in Boston were really upset about it. It's that the global population of Catholics was upset about it. The Boston Globe does not have as an audience the global population of Catholics, but the web does. It was the forwarding of the articles, not the publication of it, that created the audience. It was super distribution that created the global audience for the Catholic scandal. So to go to the FTC and say we need to raise paywalls in order to preserve the public good of the newspapers is ignoring the fact that much of the public good of publishing on the web is for the stories to find their way to people who are relevant. And it is precisely that kind of sharing that the paywall debate aims to make illegal.